It was around 10 years ago when I visited my grandmother for the spring break along with my parents and cousin. We decided to spend the day at the YMCA, and my grandmother dropped us off, promising to return after 4 hours. On that day, the gym was empty, with only a couple of adults in the exercise room. After playing for a while, we got bored and headed to the pool area. To our surprise, the pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a few games and swam some laps, but soon there wasn't much to do. We then decided to play a game of who could hold their breath underwater the longest. Suddenly, the lifeguard tapped me on the shoulder and warned me to stop, or she would have to ask us to leave. We left the pool and decided to wait for our grandmother outside. The lifeguard then suggested we go to the sauna to warm up and dry off. Though the sign said it was only for 18 and older, she still allowed us to go. The lifeguard walked us to the sauna, and after unlocking the door, she went to the thermometer and cranked up the heat. However, we were unable to see the temperature due to our height. She then left and shut the door behind her. After some time, we tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. We realized we were locked inside and started to panic. We began screaming and banging on the door, but the lifeguard was nowhere to be seen. The room grew hotter and hotter, and it became increasingly difficult to breathe. Our skin and eyes were burning, and we were struggling to stay conscious. We tried everything to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was then that I realized something strange was going on. The lifeguard had purposely locked us inside, and I didn't know why. We had been trapped for over 35 minutes, and I was on the verge of passing out. I tried to get the lifeguard's attention again, but she remained motionless. Finally, we heard footsteps approaching the sauna, and we assumed it was the lifeguard coming to let us out. But when the door opened, it wasn't the lifeguard standing there. Instead, a figure covered in black robes and a hood walked in. We were frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. The figure stood there for a few moments, silently staring at us. Then, it slowly approached us, and we could feel its breath on our faces. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. Suddenly, it reached out and grabbed us, pulling us into the darkness. I don't remember much after that. I woke up in a hospital bed with no memory of how I got there. The doctors told me that my cousin and I had been found unconscious in the sauna, suffering from severe burns and heat stroke. We were lucky to be alive. To this day, I have no idea who or what that figure was, or what its intentions were. But I know one thing for sure. I will never forget that day at the YMCA, and the horrors that lurked within its walls. I have to confess that I was always fascinated by the idea of the deep web. It felt like an undiscovered world, a place where you could find things that weren't available anywhere else. Of course, I'd heard all the horror stories too, but I didn't take them too seriously. I mean, how much of it could be true? But then I decided to find out for myself. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about, so I did some research and found a way to access the deep web. It wasn't easy, but I managed to get in. At first, I was disappointed. It seemed like a bunch of boring business documents and random websites. But then I found something that caught my eye. It was a game, a kind of online version of Clue. I love Clue, so I decided to give it a try. The game was pretty simple. You had to solve a murder by asking questions and eliminating suspects, rooms, and weapons. It was fun, and I was really getting into it. But then something strange happened. I was on the last question, and I was sure I had the answer. I typed in the name of the suspect, the weapon, and the room. But the game told me I was wrong. And then it said something that made my blood run cold. The victim is you, Alex, in the kitchen with a butcher knife. How did it know my name? How did it know I was in the kitchen? I felt a chill run down my spine. Was someone watching me? I looked around, but there was no one there. I quickly turned on the outside lights and checked the doors. They were locked. I was alone in the house. I tried to tell myself that it was just a game, that it was all in my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I closed the game and shut down my computer. I was about to leave the room when I heard a noise. It sounded like someone was breathing, but it was a wet, rasping sound. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I heard footsteps, slow and heavy. They were coming closer, step by step. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, and then I saw it. A figure in the darkness, holding a butcher knife. It was coming towards me, its eyes fixed on mine. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I was trapped, helpless. The figure was almost upon me when I finally found my voice. I screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing with pain. I looked around, but there was no sign of the figure. Had it been real or just a hallucination? I tried to get up, but my legs were weak. I stumbled to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty, but there was a strange smell in the air. It was metallic, like blood. I made my way to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. I gasped in horror at what I saw. There was a deep cut on my forehead, and my clothes were stained with blood. Had I really been attacked? I don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was just a coincidence, a freak accident. But I'll never forget the fear I felt, the sense of being trapped in a nightmare. The deep web may be fascinating, but it's also a dangerous place. And sometimes, the horror stories are all too real. Gather around the fire, my dear listeners. Let me tell you a tale that will send shivers down your spine. A tale that happened not so long ago, right here in Australia. I worked for a big telecommunications company in their operational security department. Our team was different from the others since we handled sensitive data and worked out of a special restricted site. Each morning, I had to go through several security gates, have my past vetted by guards, and walk through many security doors before even making it to my floor. The building was old, built in the 70s and 80s, and never updated since. The lights flickered, and the air conditioning ducts spewed dust on our heads. The lift was cranky, and the bathrooms were especially disturbing, as you can imagine. One day, I was working late, and my teammates had already left. It was winter, and it had already gotten dark outside. I was working on some emails when I heard the squeaky doors leading to the women's bathroom opening and closing. It was unusual to hear those doors, especially when I was pretty sure I was the only woman left in the building. I turned around to watch the outer door over the top of the cubicle walls, waiting for it to open once more. But it stayed still. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs from one of the upper floors. I ignored them and continued to focus on the silent door. The footsteps stopped halfway down, and I spun around suddenly to glance at whoever was standing there on the stairs, only to discover that no one seemed to be there either. Suddenly, I heard a whistling tune that got closer and closer. It was so out of place on this silent floor that despite the cheerfulness of the sound, my blood chilled. The whistling got louder, and I could hear someone heading for the gap in the plaster wall. My heart hammered against my ribs, and tears formed as whoever this was made their way towards me. The bathroom doors banged once more, and I stood up with a yelp and knocked over my chair. The lights in my row flickered above me, and the bathroom door smashed again. I collapsed onto the floor, skidding across the old carpet again to shelter under my desk in the darkness. Clutching my knees, I closed my eyes, and the distant whistling picked up once more, and an equally distant phone started to ring. Someone thundered up and down the stairs, and the whistling started getting closer and closer. It remained cheery and unperturbed, despite the level of noise coming out of the stairs and the banging. Suddenly, it stopped, and there was complete silence. I didn't move for a long time, not daring to breathe. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a faint whisper, a voice that seemed to come from the other side of the plaster wall. It was so quiet that I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell it was a man's voice. I sat there for what felt like hours, too scared to move or even make a sound. Finally, I heard the sound of the security gates opening, and I knew it was time to leave. As I gathered my things and made my way out of the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. From that day on, I never stayed late at work, and I always made sure to leave before it got dark outside. To this day, I still have no explanation for what happened that night, but I know one thing for sure. That building is haunted, and I'll never go back there again. I'm a big professional wrestling fan. Please don't give me crap about it being lowbrow entertainment and fake. I know it's lowbrow and fake. That's exactly what I love about it. I'm also a fan of horror. I guess I'd have to be if I'm submitting horror stories to a YouTube channel. I also heard that many people are skeptical about what happens on the deep web, so I want to share an experience that I personally had. Now, I'm not one of those people who downloaded Tor and went to a horrible website, then got scared by scary pictures and deleted it, never to return again. I've had tours on my computer for quite a long time now, actually, and I still have it on me now. I figure, I'm not really doing anything illegal myself, so I might as well see what I can find on there. Now, I'm even a member of several forums on there, and I'll be honest, though, the majority of what I've seen on the deep web pales in comparison to the stories I've heard. One thing that sticks out with me more than anything else, though, is the video of a wrestling match I saw on the deep web. And I found out about this match because another guy on one of the forums I post on saw a quoted a Ric Flair as my signature. He asked me if I liked pro wrestling. I let him know that I really enjoyed it. He asked me if I wanted to watch something real sick then, and he would direct me to it. I'm not sure at first if I want to do. Wrestling is something I enjoy, but it's not really something I want to mix with horror. Kind of a weird mixture, I still haven't even seen the movie Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies, and that already looks really bad. Maybe it might be enjoyable, though. And the guy insisted the video on the deep web was really cool and disturbing and promised me I would not regret it. Alright, before I go any further, I have to tell you, it's probably not what you're thinking. What I saw was not someone getting brutally and savagely killed or beaten half to death in the rain or something. I'm sure that's where your mind must have been going. Wrestling match on the deep web ends up being a snuff film match, but that's not it. I went to the website with the video on it and let it start to load. It took nearly 5 minutes to even begin playing. It was like one of those low-quality porn sites with a ton of ads and videos that never play. When you go in, the ones don't lie. You've been there and we all know it. Anyway, when the video started playing, it was pretty weird. It was taking place in an actual wrestling ring, but they looked like it was set up in someone's basement and there was barely enough room for anything other than the ring itself. The ceiling was so low that no one could get on top of the ropes if they were in the mood to. I kept on wondering what could possibly make this match so special. I found out pretty quickly, though. A man dressed in black spandex, sort of like a Venom costume, if you're familiar, from Spider-Man, was standing in the corner of the ring. The camera then showed me his opponent, a man lying in the center. He had one of those wrestling masks on, but there was no doubt by the look in the man's eyes that this person was already dead. The bell rang and I witnessed the worst thing I ever saw in my life. The alive wrestler ran over and dropped an elbow onto the dead one with a sickening thud. The dead body randomly wriggled around the alive wrestler, used holds and moves on this corpse. I won't explain the whole match to you, but I'll explain why it was so disturbing. The dead man's eyes were always facing the camera. You could see they were empty and his body was so stiff, the alive wrestler could barely even move his limbs. Whenever he tried to pick up the corpse's arms or legs, the body would just flop about randomly on the mat. Another disturbing fact, the dead body did not have much flexibility. So as you can imagine, the moves were very awkward. The absolute worst moment came, though, when the live man grabbed the dead one's legs. They flipped the corpse over onto its stomach and put it into a Boston crab, which is where the wrestler bends the prone wrestler's legs backwards over his back and sets down, basically bending the person's spine in the wrong direction. Well, normally that's just a wrestling move, but instantly I heard a sickening crack and I saw the dead bodies are staring at me as his body folded in half. That was more than I could take. I clicked out of the video. I tried to find a happier website on the shallow web to get the look of those dead eyes out of my mind and to forget that sickening cracking noise. I don't know if it's illegal to wrestle with corpses, and I couldn't really care less. Honestly, although I still do surf on the deep web, I've never been curious enough to go back to that site and finish watching that disgusting video. Yeah, I know you're probably skeptical about the deep web, too. My thoughts on it are this: you might not see someone getting killed or whatever. Someone might not find out where you live and stalk you, but that doesn't mean there aren't some freaky ass things on there. It was a quiet, moonless night, and the old storyteller was sitting alone by the flickering light of his fireplace. The room was filled with the scent of burning wood, and the only sound was the soft crackling of the flames. He had been preparing for this moment all day, collecting his thoughts and choosing his words with care, for tonight he would share a story that he had never dared to tell before. As he began to speak, his voice was low and measured, the words flowing like honey from his lips. The tale he told was one of darkness and terror, of a world where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, and the creatures that lurked in the shadows were not of this world. He spoke of a small village, nestled deep in the heart of a dense forest, where the people lived in fear of the woods that surrounded them. They knew that there were things in those trees that should not be disturbed, and they avoided the woods at all costs, even when they needed firewood or berries. But one day, a young man named John ventured into the forest, despite the warnings of the elders. He was determined to prove his courage and his strength, and he believed that there was nothing in those woods that could harm him. As he walked deeper into the trees, John began to feel a sense of unease. The woods were unnaturally quiet, and there was a thick fog that seemed to cling to his skin. He pushed on, though, determined to see what lay ahead. As he walked, John heard a soft rustling in the bushes. He froze, listening intently, but there was nothing there. He shrugged it off and continued on his way, but the rustling grew louder, and soon he was surrounded by a pack of wolves, their eyes glowing in the darkness. John knew he was in trouble. He tried to run, but the wolves were faster, and soon they had him surrounded. He fought bravely, but there were too many of them, and they overpowered him, tearing him apart with their sharp teeth and claws. The old storyteller paused for a moment, letting the horror of the story sink in. He could see the fear in his listeners' eyes, and he knew that he had them in the palm of his hand. But the tale was not over yet, for as the wolves devoured John's body, something strange began to happen. His blood soaked into the ground, and a dark mist rose up from the earth. The mist began to swirl around the wolves, and they howled in terror, their eyes wide with fear. But it was too late. The mist coalesced into a dark shape, a creature that was neither wolf nor man, but something else entirely. The creature let out a deafening roar, and the wolves scattered in all directions, leaving John's body behind. The creature turned to face the storyteller, and the old man felt his blood run cold, for he knew what he was looking at. It was a werewolf, a creature of darkness and terror, born from the blood of a man who had dared to enter the forbidden woods. The old storyteller's voice dropped to a whisper as he finished his tale, and his listeners sat in stunned silence, for they knew that the tale was not just a story, but a warning that there are things in this world that should be left alone, for to disturb them is to invite darkness and terror into our lives. As the fire died down and the room grew silent, the old storyteller smiled to himself. He knew that his tale had done its job, and that his listeners would never forget the horror of the werewolf in the woods. And as he settled down for the night, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I reached the top of the stairs, the musty smell of old books filling my nostrils. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, as if someone or something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to let my guard down. As I stepped into the main reading room, I was greeted by rows upon rows of dusty tomes, their spines cracked and faded with age. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as I made my way towards the center of the room, my footsteps echoing ominously in the silent space. It was then that I saw it, a strange figure standing at the far end of the room, its shape obscured by the shadows. I froze in terror, unsure of what to do next. As I watched, the figure began to move towards me, its steps slow and deliberate. I tried to back away, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The figure drew closer and closer until I could make out its features in the dim light. He was a man, or at least it looked like one, but there was something off about him. His skin was pale and clammy, his eyes sunken and lifeless. He stopped just a few feet away from me, his gaze fixed on mine. I could feel his breath on my face, cold and stale. For a moment, we stood there, staring at each other in silence. And then he spoke, his voice a hollow whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his lips barely moving. I tried to reply, but my throat was dry and my tongue felt thick in my mouth. The man took a step closer, his hand reaching out towards me. And then I woke up, drenched in sweat and trembling with fear. It was just a dream, I told myself, but the sense of unease lingered long after I had opened my eyes. For weeks afterwards, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was following me wherever I went. I avoided the library, afraid to face whatever it was that had haunted my dreams. But eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. I found myself back at the library, walking the same halls that had filled me with such dread before. And that's when I saw him again, the same figure from my dream, standing at the far end of the room. But this time, he wasn't alone. Dozens of other figures, just like him, were clustered around him, their eyes fixed on me. I turned to run, but it was too late. They were upon me in an instant, their cold hands grasping at my clothes, their voices whispering in my ear, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the library, surrounded by books and debris. I stumbled to my feet, my head pounding, and fled the building as fast as I could. I never went back to that library again. But the memory of what I saw that day haunts me still. I can still hear their whispers in my ear, feel their cold hands on my skin. And I know that, wherever they are now, they're still watching me, waiting for their next victim to come along.